Next, we have a group of questions about identifying birds by their sight and sound.
Okay.
These are really great questions because we've talked about how a student's brain is developing and how this is a great time for fourth graders to learn about bird sounds. Because their brains are ready and super squishy and ready to be able to learn these sounds better than somebody of my age now. It's really hard for me to remember bird sounds. I forget.
Yeah, well, people often tell me, hey, you really know your bird songs. How do you know so many bird songs? And when spring comes around, I can just remember what they are. I don't have to study again like a lot of people do. And my quick answer is I started learning my bird songs when I was 11 years old. And your brain is perfect for that. Just when you're learning languages now, probably, it's the same part of your brain. And if you keep using it, you will be able to learn new bird songs. I can still learn new bird songs and remember them kind of immediately right now, which most guys who are in their 60s like me, they can't even hear them, much less remember what they are. So that part of my brain, I used it a lot when I was 11 years old up until I was a teenager, and I just keep on learning. And of course, I've been traveling and just learning all these bird songs. So bird songs are an extremely important part of being able to identify birds, because 80% of the birds that you're going to detect, and 80% of the birds that we detected during our program, we did not see them, we heard them. And so I always like to stress how important the birdsong part is. And what was it? It was lesson 4, I think, maybe, was focusing on bird sounds, and maybe there wasn't enough time for a lot of students to really review that. But if there's time during the summer and you really want to learn more about identifying birds by song, I would encourage you to go back and look at that lesson 4, identifying birds by their sounds. It might intrigue some of those who are hearing impaired that we can also show you how to identify birds by sound, even if you cannot hear them. There's a way that scientists portray bird songs visually. So I'll put that out there as a teaser for you to watch that video in lesson 4 if you're really interested.
Yeah, that was a really cool one to be able to see what it sounds like.
Exactly.
And that was a question. So Javen Z from Way Elementary and Ian K from East Hills Elementary were asking questions about bird song and being able to identify them.
Okay. And it's like anything, it's studying.
Yep.
You just have to study. When I was 12, 13, 14 years old, we had a woods near us, and I would go out and see birds, and then I would listen to them, and some of them I would just track them down until I saw them. And so then I would get the connection between the sound and the sight, what that bird sounds like. But then the ones I could never see, I just remembered in my head, which is something you can do when you're a teenager and you can't do when you're over 20 years old. And so I'd come home and I'd remember, the 6 or 7 sounds that I heard, and I'd play my records and try to match them up. And then other things that I would do is, in preparation for going out, I'd decide, okay, well, I'm going to study these 6 or 7 warblers for about an hour and just listen to them over and over again, and just kind of get them in my head. And so that's kind of like learning your vocabulary in your language class, is just repetition and listening and learning. And so it's the same method. And so that's how you end up being good at bird songs. And it's a very important thing if you're doing the bird censusing. It's not an important part for bird banding because everything is visual for that. But like I say, 80% of the birds that are out there, you're not going to see them. You're just going to hear them.
Yeah. Speaking of tracking, this is Aiden K's question from West Hills Middle. Do you keep track of all the birds you see? And I remember from your videos that you always had something that you were carrying around when we were walking around the property.
Right. Well, there's 2 different components to that. I always write down all the birds that I see and hear on any given day or field trip or location. And so that's just a good habit to get into. In Britain, bird watchers in Britain are really good at that. They have field notebooks and they even do sketches. They learn how to draw birds when at a really young age. And so, I used to draw and paint, and so it's a lot of fun to do as well. And so getting into a good habit of having a field notebook or journal is always a good thing. You can look back at them years later and see what you saw. And so on a daily basis, yes, keep tracking of all that. But and another aspect is, how many birds have I seen in my entire life? And so when you become an active bird watcher, you start compiling a list of all the birds you've seen in your life, and they call it a life list. And so I've got loads and loads of notes on all the different birds that I've seen throughout my life. And so, yes, I keep track of that because I'm a really hardcore bird watcher. And so people who just watch birds at their feeders and enjoy them, that's a really fun thing to do, and you don't have to keep track. But sometimes if you're obsessed like me, then you're going to have to keep track of everything. So it depends on you and what you want to do. But that's what I did.
So William X from East Hills Middle and Natalia B from West Hills Middle, they want to know, what is the most birds you saw in one day?
So I don't remember exactly the number. There are two different occasions. So this gets into a different aspect about bird watching that can be more like a sport than science. There's competition among bird watchers, who saw the most birds in 1 year, who saw the most birds on their life list, who saw the most birds in one day. And so they have this event called a big day, which with all of our quarantining now, there's a lot less of it going on, but they've been used for fundraisers and so forth. And I've participated in some of these. And basically, it's a 24-hour birdathon. And you start at midnight and you end at midnight, and you try to see and hear as many birds as you can in that 24-hour period, and within one state or within one county or within whatever geographic area. And so you have to plan ahead and you have to know your birds, you have to know where the birds are, when they're there, and have a little bit of luck as well. And so I've done a little bit of that. It's very, very tiring. And I've also done inadvertent ones. The most birds I've seen in a day were not on those events. I think about 130 or 150 species in a day is the most I've seen doing that. There was a time in the 1980s when my wife and I was on a business trip and she came with me, and we decided to drive from the coast of California up into the Sierra Nevada mountains in a day and just see what we would see. And we ended up seeing, I think it was like 172 species that day. And because we went from shoreline habitats through fields and meadows and agriculture and shrubs and trees and forests and pine woods and all kinds of habitats that California can provide for you. And so that allowed us to see 170 some in a day. And then on another trip in Brazil that we did in the 1990s, there were just lots of birds around in this one area. We drove about 70 miles into the Pantanal, a big marsh, and lots of habitats again. And I think we saw over 180 species in that one day. So some people have seen more than 200 species in a day in places like Texas, and almost 300 species in a day in places like Peru. But that takes a lot of planning and a lot of effort. So seeing 100 species in a day in Michigan is a really, really good day. And so we probably maxed out at about 50 or 60 species this year at the Nature Center, which is pretty good for a patch of woods that's kind of in the middle of a residential area. So that's pretty good.
Yeah. So Jude K from West Hills Middle wants to know, how many birds do you know?
I don't know how many I know. I think I used to know more than I know now. This is my bird room. All these books on the shelf here, these are all bird field guides to various parts of the world. This one is Peru. I took a trip to Peru in 2018, and basically I studied ahead of time. It's easier to recognize a bird when you see it rather than stand there and flip through the book every time you see a bird. especially when you're paying money to have somebody take you around. And so I have 2 more walls of books besides the one behind me with bird books on it. And so I have seen almost 4,000 species, and I could probably identify at least almost that many by sound from memory by now. There's places like when we went to East Africa, I studied the sounds as well as the book, and so some of those birds I still remember, and some of them I don't. There are a lot of little songbirds that sound the same, and other things that are very, very distinctive. So, easily I could probably by sound identify 2,000 or 3,000 birds, and by sight I could probably identify 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 maybe, just because I've been looking at these books a lot. That's something that I used to do for fun when I was a teenager. Is I used to just flip through the book and look at the pictures and think, oh, I'd like to see that someday. If one of those hopped in front of me, I want to make sure I'd recognize it rather than have to look away from it and look at the book. And then when I look back up, the bird is gone. So that's why you study ahead of time, is to be able to recognize them without having to look in the book.
Yep. Oh yeah, that would be, yeah, if you didn't know it ahead of time, you would just be looking, and that bird's not going to hang around waiting for you to figure out what it is.
Right. And so another good thing to do is, if you don't really want to look in the book, write down some notes. Describe what it looks like. Was it the size of a sparrow? Did it have a big white patch on its wing? Did it have yellow breast, gray head, white spots in the tail? Write down all this stuff, and then you can go back to your book when you get home. A lot of bird watchers keep the books in their car. Those of us who drive, 4th graders, you're not driving yet, but having the book available at the car, but not carrying it with you constantly, because there is a temptation to open the book and look at it right on the spot, and that's somewhat helpful. But you're also, when you're looking in the book, you're not looking at birds.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep. So you'd miss out.
Yep.
The student, it seems like its initials DDM from Conant Elementary, asks, what is the most common bird?
That's a very broad question, and I'm not sure if it just applies to the E.L. Johnson Nature Center or not, but we provided some exercises with top 10 birds, and I think black-capped chickadee was number 1 for observed and near the top for banded. And so the black-capped chickadee is a pretty common bird at the Nature Center. It's also pretty common in Michigan. But there are some birds that, worldwide population is, if you look at that aspect of it. There are some birds that nest in southern oceans, that there are millions of them, related to albatrosses and things. There's a bird in East Africa. It's called the red-billed keelia, and it's related to our house sparrow, but it's got a red beak and some interesting marks on the head. And they actually feed on grains and things, and so they're a little bit of a pest to farmers and things in East Africa. But they have filmed flocks of several million individual red-billed keelias, and they think there are billions of them. European starlings are very, very numerous. I have seen flocks of 50,000 European starlings all in one flock.
Whoa.
And so they're quite common in Europe still, but here in North America, where they're not native, they're invasive. A lot of invasive things end up being really, really abundant and common, and that's what's happened with things like European starlings too. So it's hard to pinpoint which is the most common bird. It depends on where you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you did the students did an activity on that, about those adaptations. So you're going to find birds in locations where they're able to survive and thrive based on the food they need, the shelter they need, and the space they need, and water. So
right. And another important aspect of that is competition. In the bird banding part, I think it was lesson 7, we talked about migration, which is really the core of this whole program, is migration. It may not have gotten assigned, I'm not sure, with time limits, but the bird migration is an important aspect of all birds' life history. And we talked about the warblers and how they compete with each other for the same bugs. but they feed in different manners and different styles. And so they end up not competing with each other so much. But when you have a bird that you bring from Europe over to North America, it doesn't necessarily have any competition. If it does have competition, it's not going to survive. There's already birds using all these different habitats and all these different niches. But if a bird like a European starling or a house sparrow can find a niche that's not occupied, where there's no competition, then wow, the population explodes. You get millions or billions of them, and they become a pest. They become invasive. And that's the same thing with flowers and plants that get brought over, and they find a niche that nothing else is using, and they occupy it in great numbers, and then end up being a problem.
Yep. The last question for identifying birds is from Gibson L. from Conan Elementary. Have you discovered any new birds this year that you haven't seen before at the center?
Okay, so at the center is the key to that question, because we've been keeping track of these birds since 1990 and even longer. The bird records go back to 1947. I was just looking at some of those. And we did actually detect during the 2020 census 2 species that were never observed on these lists before. Bald eagle, which has nested recently in Bloomfield Hills, was detected on the survey on one or 2 days. I think, Cass, you were there when it flew over. Everybody got distracted and watched the bald eagle soaring around and watching the tiny little crow chasing it.
It was being chased by a crow.
Yes, and the crow looked like a little bird next to it. So even though bald eagles are known to be in the area, that was the first time we had gotten one on the census itself. And then another bird that we got on the census itself was wild turkey. And wild turkeys have been expanding in Michigan for the last 20 or 30 years. They used to be quite rare, and now they seem to be in a lot of more suburban and residential areas, which is very, very weird, because it was always a very, very wild bird, hence the name wild turkey. When there's one running around in your subdivision, it doesn't seem quite so wild anymore. But they have apparently adapted to humans, and maybe there are less coyotes and less predators around in these areas. And so for the first time, we had wild turkey on our census as well. And then as far as banding goes, we banded 5 or 6 eastern phoebes for the first time ever. Now, eastern phoebes nest on the cabin and maybe a couple other buildings around in the nature center, but we have never caught one before because our nets are not anywhere near those nests. Because the nature center was closed since March, a lot of birds have found a lot of freedom to go wherever they want now. And so there's a nest on the nature center, there's a nest on the cabin, there's another nest on the tower itself that actually looked like a raccoon must have gotten to that nest and got rid of it. But it seems like there are 4 or 5 different nesting pairs of phoebes around the nature center this year. And so it was because of the increased numbers, it just increased our chances of catching some. So eastern phoebe was a bird we had new for the banding. As far as me seeing new birds, I always try to see new birds by going to new countries. Foreign travel is going to be out for a couple of years because of all this quarantining, but I hope to get out to another country soon and see some new birds for me. But as far as discovering a new bird to science, I have never discovered a new bird to science. That takes a lot of devotion, and there are only certain places in the world where that's possible. A lot of birds in the Amazon and in the foothills in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and then Indonesia, and even parts of Africa. There are probably some birds to be discovered. There's 1 or 2 new birds discovered for science every year. But I'm not one of those scientists who goes out and looks for them.
I'm sure that would take a lot of time, a lot of planning, and it probably wouldn't be here in Michigan.
No, pretty much all the birds in North America are already known. There are no birds to be discovered in North America.
I just wanted to share with the students my screen now of just some more information about just, I guess, what we were saying, making sure that the kids get outside. Go with your families as well. There's birds there, and you can hear them and then you can see them. Wanted to share, just remember those bird resources that we've been showing throughout these lessons. Going to allaboutbirds.org, birdscornell.edu, audubon.org are really great resources to get you involved. And one thing that we also shared was the Merlin app as well, to be able to identify a bird based on the size and the colors that you see and what that bird was doing.
Right. That'll go through birdscornell.edu.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Follow the Johnson Nature Center on social media, because we do definitely advocate for things that are going on, not just in the bird world, but everywhere else. We have information on those pages for social media, and let your families know that the trails are now open at the Nature Center. They opened yesterday, June 1st. The trail hours on the weekdays are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and the weekends, the trails are open from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. The building itself is still closed and the restrooms are still closed, but again, you can go on the trails, and the birds that you see in your neighborhood, you might see at the Nature Center, you might see or hear different ones.
And just related to the social media, I just wanted to ask you, Cass, if we didn't answer your question of all the 400 fourth graders that are hopefully watching this, there might still be another question or a follow-up or something. Is there? Could they just go through that social media and just post the question there, and then somehow you guys can either answer it on your own probably, or you can get the question back to me, and I can, we can just go back and forth, through social media. I'm not on Facebook, but I do emails, and so we could, we can continue to answer questions that continue to come up if you'd like.
Yes, a big part of what Alan and I do is we want to answer questions and continue to provoke and excite not just kids, but everybody about being outdoors. So any questions, yes, shoot them over to the social media page. Or you'll also see that in continuing lessons, if you have any questions, email your teachers and they'll send it to me if they can't answer it, or if you can't answer it as well. You as in the student, will be able to answer it for you. Yep, that's great.
If I can't answer it, it's a really, really good question.
Yes, definitely. Yep. Of course, thank you to Alan Chartier, the bird bander, but also to the fourth grade team of teachers who were able to give us information about the lessons that you guys all wanted. So those teachers, thank you so much for being supportive of that.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, so that's where we were able to give the lessons to, and for you kiddos to have them. The bird guides that did the bird banding help with Alan were there as well to help get birds out of the mist nets carefully, and so that Alan could bird band them. So we had those 3 guides there to do that. And then definitely all the behind scenes stuff that had to do with the technology and the video recording. So we had lots of people involved in this, so we want to thank them as well.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you students so much for being a part of this program. This was done differently. I learned a lot from doing it this way. And
yeah, I did too, but none of it had to do anything to do with birds. I learned a lot about technology and streaming and all that stuff.
Yeah, so thank you all students for being a part of this program. And I think that's it, right?
Yep. Thanks very much. Hope to see you out on the trails.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye.